Good morning.
There is a great insurance gap in this part of the world. Give us a sense of how bad it is and where it is worse.
Okay, so the insurance penetration in Asia Pacific is probably half of what it is in the Western world. So as a percentage of GDP, it's probably less than 3% across the board. At the same time, tragically, this is the region which bears half of the total economic cost of natural catastrophe. And we've measured that to be about $53 billion US a year. So what that means is the losses that happen here, there's a huge gap between the coverage that's afforded by insurance and the uninsured loss, and that, of course, falls to the taxpayer.
It is all about accessibility. I mean, you try to make it as affordable as possible. I mean, what is Lloyd's doing, and what are your conversations like with governments to make them realize insurance is important?
Well, the first place to start is Lloyd's is still relatively new to Asia. Lloyd's is a 330-year-old marketplace, which began in London in the 16th century. In the last 20 years, we've physically been in Asia. So we've brought our underwriting expertise and our capacity to Asia. So before that, there just wasn't the expertise, there wasn't the capacity, there wasn't the know-how. So by being here in Asia, being close to governments, being close to communities, we can now start to talk and create a narrative and raise an awareness for the demand for insurance.
Where are the biggest potential?
Well, they're right across the board. If you look at some of the countries such as Thailand, such as the Philippines, such as China, have insurance penetration rates of less than 1% of GDP. That means that the country is spending less than 1% of its national GDP on insurance protection. So there's no real exceptions. If you look at a country further south, such as New Zealand, which is a mature market, they have very, very high insurance penetration rates, and that is because the government has created a scheme to mandate the purchase of property insurance. So in the event of a major catastrophe, it's there to respond to claims.
You tend to link insurance to GDP growth, and if you take a look at this part of the world, you see the most growth in the likes of India, China, Philippines, Indonesia. Where are we, and what kind of growth can we anticipate?
Well, we're really excited by the growth in GDP in this part of the world. In fact, one of the reasons we're so looking forward to the opportunities is that Asia GDP is outperforming the West. In countries like China and India in particular, but also Indonesia, the Philippines. I don't need to tell you about the economic growth in those countries. And we're very well positioned. We've opened in India this year. Last month we opened our first ever reinsurance branch onshore in India to support that market. We've opened in China in 2007, and we've seen growth there. We've seen phenomenal growth in the last few years in China. In fact, Singapore is now our largest underwriting operation in the world outside London. And we've seen growth treble in the last 7 years in Singapore.
There are risks to those growth. I mean, if you take a look at China, capital controls is one of them. Are you seeing any impact from China's capital controls?
No, Lloyd's is not a primary insurer in Asia. We're very much a reinsurer at present. That means we complement the domestic markets in China and elsewhere, and we fill gaps. We come in with specialist expertise such as cyber, such as terrorism risk, political violence. So we provide coverages which a domestic insurer in Asia wouldn't have the expertise or capacity to provide. So we are sort of secondary to a lot of those sort of issues.
The reinsurance business is about scale. What is your expansion plans in this part of the world?
Well, as I said, we're very well positioned so far in Asia, and we are looking to track GDP.
So what does that translate to in terms of expansion? Are you hiring more? Are you opening more offices?
So we've done extraordinarily well. If you look at Singapore, for example, we have nearly 400 people on the ground in Singapore, and most of those are Singaporeans. Most of those are local players. That's from 17 years ago. Today we had one syndicate. Today we have 23 syndicates, and we're writing about $600 million US. So that is the sort of growth that we're expecting across the region.
And what do you view as the greatest risks in Asia, and what can you do to mitigate those risks?
Well, the risks are vast. We've talked about the natural catastrophe risk, which I still think is the largest risk in Asia. We produced a study last year called the City Risk Index, and what that index does is it tracks the total GDP or the economic output at risk from a range of man-made and natural disasters. And whilst historically this region is very prone to natural catastrophe, if you look forward, we see emerging risks now as some of the biggest risks facing Asia, such as cyber. Cyber is an enormous risk. Other things such as pandemics, such as economic crises like the stock market crashes, for example. So the whole risk landscape is changing, and it's not just the traditional natural catastrophe risks which face Asia, but also these emerging risks such as technological risks. And these are less tangible, so they're much harder to insure.